Okay. We are all set.
Okay. It is 6 p.m. on February 20th, and we will call the meeting of the Berry Unified Union School District Policy Committee to order. We have an agenda. Are there any additions or changes to the agenda? Any suggestions? Hearing none, I need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All right. All those in favor? Aye, aye, aye. All right. We're ready. We are good to go.
Who was the second? Was it Tom? Thank you.
All right. Have anyone for public comment? Okay, hearing none, we'll move past that.
May I make a quick announcement
Sure.
to everybody? For those out in virtual land, we're trying a new owl this evening, and we're trying to troubleshoot what's been going on. If we have problems tonight, we will know that it is not the owl, but it is the computer. So as you guys do, if you're not hearing us, just let us know, and then I can duly note it. But we're anticipating not having problems tonight, just FYI.
All right. So moving on to number 4, which is the approval of the meeting minutes of January 30th, 2023. Any additions or corrections to those minutes? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay. Juliana,
Second.
who was that second?
Tim.
Tim. Okay, thank you, Tim. Thank you, Giuliano. All those in favor of approving the minutes of January 30th? Anyone opposed? We have, okay, I
think our in-person audio is coming from the sound bar.
Hang on, everybody. We're good. Chris, can you say testing 1, 2, 3?
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing.
Right on. That's what we need to do. Thank you.
Yep, I can hear you guys fine. Also.
Great.
Okay. New business is the BUUSD Policy Review Index. It is there. I don't believe there are any significant changes to this since last we met. Anyone have any concerns or questions about the policy manual index?
I do just have something that we'll be adding very shortly. Should be ready to roll for our next meeting. Meeting with our Student Services Director, Stacy Anderson, this morning. She shared that the district special education procedure manual is just about done, and she's going to link that on here just so we know. So that'll be up to date. Sounds like you did some updates as well, Mr. Ather.
Yes, I went through over the weekend and updated Spalding's. We're actually in much better shape than I thought we would be. Obviously anticipated we had lots of operational things, but we have much more formally documented procedures than I had anticipated. And there are a number of procedures that are written in policy, so that's going to cover all of our schools. So it's looking like there's light at the end of the tunnel with regard to our procedures.
Are you referring just to the one Chris just mentioned, or all procedures? Okay.
Across the board.
Yeah, the one I mentioned is for the whole district.
The special ed one. But then Luke is referring to all other procedures. Am I right about this?
So there's
Spalding
Just for
specific.
Spalding. It would be
there's a number of procedures that are in policy despite our best efforts.
Right.
So that does cover the whole district, but Spalding specifically is in pretty decent shape. I wasn't able to look at the other schools, but Spalding's doing pretty well.
All right. All right. Any further questions on the district policy manual index? All right. The next thing is the VSBA policy notes. These are the items that are sent to us from the Vermont School Boards Association in regard to what they have seen about the various policies and their suggestions for model policies. So we have corrected or added to and enhanced the policy edit key at the top to show just what underline is, just what strike through is, and just what highlighted is. So as we look at these policies, that's the key for what is taking place.
Big shout out to Tina Gilbert for this work. She's really tried to tighten this up for us and make these discussions go much more smoothly. And thank you, Tina, if you're watching this video, and I know you will be.
I was just going to say it's hugely helpful, I think, for people following along and also for prepping for the meetings. It's just right there without, usually on my computer, I would have, 30 tabs open going back and forth between all the things. So to have it all there is just great.
So the policies that we are going to be looking at tonight are D23, D23, D32, try to keep that straight in your brain. D23, D32, and B20. So we'll look at those and see what they have to offer and how they affect our schools. And questions on the policy committee, VSBA. This is their recommendations from them. Okay. So moving on to our old friend D23. This is the selection of instructional materials. And as you can see from the strike through and sensitive issues has been deleted. There's a tremendous amount of information that has been deleted. And there are pieces that have been underlined for importance. Okay. Yeah.
I have concerns about the deletions. I don't remember if we've discussed this. I mean, since I've been on the policy. The deletion of the sensitive issues is concerning to me. I think that's wonderful that we have opposing sides of controversial issues, that we have instructional materials representing opposing sides, so that with guidance, young citizens may develop the practice of critical thinking. That sounds like a great idea to have that as the school policy. And that's being deleted, if I'm understanding the point of this presentation. And I'm not sure why the words "and sensitive issues" are deleted from the title. Maybe because that portion I just referred to is being deleted. But why would that be deleted?
It just comes down to the VSBA saying that the language in this policy no longer is aligned with statute. So I think the key thing is, and Luke, feel free to jump in, it doesn't mean we can't address this in other ways. It just doesn't need to be in the policy itself. So,
But it could be in the policy.
Right. So for some context, it was selection of instructional materials. That first part of this policy, as it stands, was D32 through the VSBA. We met as a policy committee years ago, back prior to 2019 or early 2019, and felt like it was important that we also addressed how materials were delivered, not just what was delivered. And so we added language to VSBA's model policy. And that's what gave us this kind of two policies together. When VSBA updated their model policy and changed it from a to consider D32 to a recommended of D23 and made a couple of tweaks, that does not align necessarily with our policy because we have a whole added section. So my thought is that if we were to adopt VSBA's model policy for selection of instructional materials, I would propose that we added a different policy about teaching sensitive issues, so that it would be we wouldn't lose the work that was done. It would just be in a different place so that it's not messing with VSBA's model policy.
Because
So,
they're
can I
arguably
ask a
separate
question
issues.
to follow up on that? Just a quick- a question, can I ask you
Yeah,
a question?
Chris, you okay with that? I don't know who's.
Okay, if I ask a question? Is that
Yeah,
all right?
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, all right, I just want to understand, I mean, this is a clarifying question for me to understand. So was this portion that we call the sensitive issues portion, I suppose? As I understand it, that was not a part of the proposed, the model policy
Correct.
that had been previously proposed, that may have had a different number, D32.
Yes.
Okay, but the board and maybe the policy committee added this to it. Okay.
Yes.
Well, statute or not, I mean, we're here as the policy committee. Why would this, if it could have been added previously, why not add it here? I mean, we're in the same situation. A new policy regarding instructional materials, and this language was added to the model policy proposed previously called D32. What would be the earthly reason for not also adding it to this, or just leaving it there like we did before?
I would say maybe formatting.
Yeah.
So that we maintain that alignment with the SBA. And then this would be the sensitive issues, instructional sensitive issues would become a policy D40 something, because it would be a local policy and not a VSBA policy. It doesn't, I mean,
Yeah.
my thought is that we should keep them both, whether they're two separate things or combined, I don't really care.
Another follow-up question. Did the original model called D32, was it previously labeled selection and instruction materials and sensitive issues?
No, it was.
Okay, again, it was added. So I say, why not? It's a policy that was accepted by this whole process here locally. I'm an advocate for rather than going back to the drawing board, coming up with another policy separate, another label. Why don't we cut to the chase and keep this? That's what I would be suggesting.
I mean, I think the main reason we did agree as a committee to try to stick to as close to the VSBA policies as we can. And given that they're saying it's no longer aligned with statute, that's where all this was coming from. I mean, the point is a good one though.
Yeah, and to say, just a quick response to the no longer aligned with statute. I mean, this part was never a part of their D32 anyway. So my point there is they weren't really weighing in on this being statute or not. It wasn't even on their radar. If I'm understanding the sequence of events, this piece wasn't statute or not, something locally was done, approved by this process. And like I say, unless I hear something, I'm an advocate for keeping it.
Chris, your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. So one thing that I wanted to point out is just in the policy, the VSBA policy notes, what it says about this is that the VSBA collaborated with the Vermont Curriculum Leaders Association on the revisions. And so I think it's important for us to take that into consideration also, that folks who work in this field and are professionals in this area have worked on this language. And then the other thing is that I note that it says that the underlined sentence there, please note that VisBit will be developing model procedures to accompany this model policy. We've been somewhat on hold pending that underlined sentence. And the recommendation in the note says, add the underlined sentence to the end of the policy so the policy can move forward for first reading. Board approves the policy, not procedures. Once procedures are available, it can be revisited if needed. So one option would be for us to go ahead with the model policy without the sensitive issues, knowing that it's going to come back around in some way with the procedures. And then at that time, if those procedures don't cover these sensitive issues, which it may, then we could at that point put back into policy committee to put in a local policy that's related specifically to the sensitive issues. But if we're trying to align with VSBA, and we know that there will be upcoming more work on this policy regarding those procedures, which might address sensitive issues. I would hate for us to sort of like double down with putting it in two different places when it might be coming out anyway. So that's my thought on that.
My thought on that is that it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that VSBA did not have a sensitive policy proposal that we've seen that we considered and included. It was something locally generated. And frankly, I'm not sure as a member of this, in my role as a citizen, that I'm that concerned about always agreeing with the VSBA and their priorities.
Well, that is something we and the board have committed to doing and have been doing all along for the past 2 years pretty steadily and in a committed way.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, and as a result, we're really getting a lot of this cleaned up and consistent. And I think we can address some of these concerns, kind of how you were suggesting it, Luke.
And just to add a little bit more of historical overview, when the policy committee years ago were working on these things, we really didn't want to have a slew of policies. So we tried to group things together that went together. So instructional materials, sensitive issues linked together. So put them all in one. So, and maybe it's just time because of the evolution of statutes, it's time to break them apart.
If I could say in response, I think if anything, the controversies are increasing, not decreasing, in the community, in the culture, in the school system. And to remove this from the policy and not have it, as a member of the policy committee, one of the citizens coming to this board, I don't want to see this go away, even for a semester.
I think to that point, Guy Isabel, when he sat on this committee, he used to ask pretty regularly, is this a policy that administration uses in your building? Is this something that you use?
Yeah.
And I will say this policy, specifically the sensitive issues and delivering content, is something I've referred to multiple times when talking with teachers about, hey, here's a topic coming up, or here's something that's going on. Remember that we have a policy and this is what it says. So I think I don't want to lose it. Like I said, whether it's two places or one, it is something that is useful and I personally have used and referred to when I'm talking with teachers about delivering content. And I agree that there's more and more controversial issues. Even things that weren't controversial are now. And so I think we need a guiding light to come back to say, like, hey, and here it's written. So, and I agree with you, Chris, that the SBA is really not, they never addressed the teaching of the sensitive issues. They addressed the selection of materials. My concern is that their procedures are going to address selecting instructional materials, not teaching those areas. So I'd hate to wait for them to come up with something because I'm not sure that that's even in their queue. And we did, just for clarity, when we added this, we had it vetted by our legal counsel. So this isn't something we just tossed in there.
Right.
It is aligned with statute to the point of it doesn't violate statute.
And I was remiss, just so to be clear for the record, the first page of the proposal, D23, has a crossed out beginning with instructional material down to a paragraph 5. And then the second page has teaching about controversial / sensitive issues. That's also crossed out. And that's also something I think should be kept. Oh, and also at the top of page 2, there's paragraph 6 through 10 that I also would like to see retained and not deleted even temporarily while we're pending approval of something else.
I think I think those are separate things, though. I mean, the instructional materials will be selected by professional staff in accordance with the following criteria and procedures. That's different than the section that specifically says teaching about controversial, sensitive issues.
Well, if it's being suggested that this be another policy created and approved, I just think that's frankly a waste of time. It's already here. It doesn't violate anything. I don't know why we couldn't just delete the reference with the cross out of and sensitive issues and keep the crossed out two sections that I have mentioned.
What will the impact be on schools if we?
That's the thing.
If we're already complying, as Luke said, with the sensitive issues portion here, the two sections that are being crossed out in the proposal, but it's now currently the policy, was vetted legally, it was approved by the board. Why rehash that? We've got it. Just delete the and sensitive materials portion. Doesn't seem to be contradictory of the current portion. It's being proposed by the VSBA. That's what I would propose. And if I need to do that in the form of a motion, I'll do it.
So I was just going to say one of the other issues, and I think Andrea has her hand up, maybe she's going to speak to this, is also the rescinding of D32. So we don't have an answer yet from the VSBA, Alice, if I'm right, about what the statute was specifically. And so there was a question of, should we rescind D32 in the meantime while we're working on D23 and deciding what to do because of the statute issues?
But again, for clarification, this sensitive issues piece wasn't in the D32 proposed by VSBA. That was my understanding. It was added locally.
Yes.
Correct?
That is,
So I don't know that they even reviewed our portion dealing with sensitive issues when they came up with the new instructional materials.
They wouldn't have.
They wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
So
They're
I believe the first cross, at the bottom of page 1, where that's crossed out, I think that has been replaced by the new instructional materials portion. The second at the bottom of page 2, that is bolded, underlined, teaching about controversial, sensitive issues. That's a separate, just ours. But I think the first part is what was replaced. So to me, that makes sense to go away because it's being replaced. It's just that bolded bottom of page 2.
so you're saying that this should just flow from one to the other without that
Right.
title there?
Well, I'd leave the title because that's where it does talk about
Right.
teaching. But
Are you saying, again, to clarify, the portion that was underlined on page 1, extending to, I'll call paragraph 10 on page 2, was a part of the old D32 proposed by VSBA?
yes,
Okay, so that's their underlining of their old VSBA D32. Correct? I mean, underline, crossing out. They crossed out their old VSBA policy called D32. Is that what you're saying?
our D32, I'm going to fast forward a little bit. So if you go to the next pages there, we have D32. So it's BUUSD D32.
Right.
That 1 through 10 is what has been struck out
Right.
of the D20.
Right, and that's something that the SBA is recommending
Correct.
cross that out.
Right.
and we've had this in place for 3 years now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that 1 through 10 that you're looking at in the proposed,
Right.
all kinds of marked up sheet,
Right.
is what would be
Okay.
removed and replaced by the underlined section.
Right.
So it isn't really going away. It's just being moved.
Oh, no, it's going away. It's being replaced.
Yeah, the first part, and I may have misstated, the part on page 1 and 2 of the what will be called D23, that's page 1 and 2 crossed out, is may not have been, that's not part of the sensitive issues piece. Correct? Yeah.
Correct. That's my understanding. Yes.
Okay. That was part of the old D32 that the SBA authored, I presume, in the first place.
The first part of it.
Yes, right. Okay. Then the teaching about controversial / sensitive issues is something that was generated locally.
We added locally. Yes.
Right. Okay, I guess restate what I said before. I think that's a good idea, and I don't see any reason that's been aired here that it would not be included. Why regenerate it? Delete the and sensitive issues piece and just keep it a part of the local policy. And went through the whole process before.
I think again, just thinking about what Chris was saying earlier about this being vetted by, these curriculum folks, we're just trying to stay consistent. I'm just wondering if we can still address your concerns, Tom, while respecting.
Yeah, if I could ask about the respect piece, I mean, I don't know that they did not vet the teaching about controversial / sensitive issues. They didn't look at that. The SBA has never looked at that. I mean, that's not something they came up with or looked at.
No.
Yeah, so they didn't vet it. I mean, and it was part of the old policy here. I think it's a good idea to keep it. And I'm also told that it's being followed anyway. So as a member of the policy committee, I think it's a good idea to keep something being followed, was approved. Keep it in place.
If we were to do so, just to be clear, we'd be going against the recommendations of the VSBA and the Vermont Curriculum Leaders Association, VICLA. I mean, it's not
because we've added some information about dealing with sensitive issues. I don't see that's a deal breaker.
No, I'm just noting it. This
Okay.
was they collaborated with us on the revisions and
On the
recommended it.
ground, what would be the outfall of keeping that in? Would there be any negative?
Not to my,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
not to my knowledge.
Andrea, you had your hand, you're on first.
Okay, yeah, I lost my connection for a bit, so I missed a little bit of the conversation. But one of the things that I would be concerned about is VSBA had altered the policy because it was no longer aligned with statute. And of what is crossed out, we don't know which of those lines were because it was something that we had in there homegrown that they don't have, or if it was something that was crossed out because it was not aligned with statute. So if
No.
the committee went ahead and followed the board's directive to adopt the VSBA policy on selection of instructional materials and then did its own separate for the teaching of sensitive issues, and keep in mind that was vetted in May of 2019, so that probably has to be revetted at this point because we don't know if everything that was okay then is okay now, if that makes
Just to
sense.
be clear, VSBA didn't strike any of this out. Tina struck things out based upon what VSBA has. So VSBA has never looked at our teaching about controversial and sensitive issues. That's not even on their
That was
radar.
my understanding.
They only were looking at selection of instructional materials.
Right,
So
but,
the edit regarding that,
but with some of the verbiage that was struck out, anything that was ever in their original policy, we don't have that one in front of us right now, so we don't know.
we do, it's the next policy we're looking at. We might have kind of
That's the new one, right?
go back. No,
No, that's the old one.
5.4. 5.4 is D32. That's what we currently have in place. So that 1 through 10 under implementation was removed, and replaced by what's underlined under implementation in D32 of 5.3. What was also taken out by Tina was the teaching about controversial and sensitive issues, because that's not part of the VSBA model policy. That's why she struck it out, because
Trying to be consistent.
that was in line with our practices, right? So she wasn't trying to do anything nefarious. It was just, that's not part of the VSBA's policy, model policy.
Sonia and Giuliano have hands.
Let's see who's up. Giuliano, you're next. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed you. Well, Giuliano, are you there?
Yes, I am. So is that more of a procedural type thing? So if we take that out, Luke, could you just automatically enter that in as a procedure?
The teaching about controversial and sensitive issues, I'm not sure that really falls under procedure, because it feels much more like a guiding light than a
Like direction manual.
direction or path,
Yeah.
like how you get there. It's more philosophical about what we believe the way to teach things is.
Okay, so in statute, we're able to, we can't go below statute, but we as a district can go above and beyond. We can be more critical than what the statute lays out.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Sonia?
Yeah, I hear what Tom is saying, and I think that section might be good to keep, but I wonder if it would make more sense to avoid having this conversation again the next time that this gets revised by the VSBA, is if you pull that out and create a separate policy, because you're going to be having this conversation again. If you keep the VSBA model policies the same across the board, then you don't have to pull out the parts that we've added in, and it just seems like it would be more efficient for everyone. And if the policy committee and the board decide that that part of that policy, that was our homegrown part, is important and we want to keep it, then we create a new policy and have that be our own in-house policy. Because if it's good stuff and we want to keep it, then it sounds like then we should do that. But I think it seems like the board has really, and the policy committee have really been working to try to align with the VSBA. And by keeping that in, does that mean that becomes a different number because it's not exactly like the model policy? Does it sort of align with the model policy so it keeps that number, but we have this other confusing part that's our own? So that would be my suggestion.
I'd like to respond when I have
Sure.
a chance. Okay.
Go
Aligning with the VSBA policy, I mean, maybe that's how it's working in practice, but I'm not so sure that that's necessarily, I mean, if that's what we want to do, I might as well go home. I mean, I think as a member of the policy committee, we should be able to look at the policy being proposed. If everything is going to be controlled by Montpelier, by statute, or by the VSBA, then we got nothing to do. So I don't know why we would eliminate this. It's been vetted. It's been approved by a previous board. And it's part of this instructional material. It seems to fit in the topic. And I'll, it sounds like the VSBA, again, to be clear, page 1 and 2, that was something they had a hand in, saying this is no longer appropriately part of D23, the paragraphs 1 through 10. But the rest of it, I don't know why it would go. Why we would get rid of it.
Juliana and Chris have hands up. Giuliano?
So I think the question is whether or not it benefits us to keep it in. And I would direct that question to Luke. If it does, we can keep it in for a limited amount of time and then develop, another local policy. But if Luke doesn't want the gap of it being out of policy, that's probably what we should look into, is just hold it and then immediately create a new policy that once is taken by the board, we just delete it from this policy.
I think the risk in deleting it before we have something else in place is pretty minimal. This isn't something that within the next week we could get burned on it, I suppose, but really,
Unlikely.
it's pretty unlikely. It could be a policy D40 and it's just cut and pasted. The language is already embedded and it's already there. And we could say we're going to pull that out, put it in a new policy as D40 and
Under the instructional
local.
section.
What I'm not understanding is why we've been talking about it needs modification or deletion, or we need to come up with a new one. It sounds to me from what you said, Luke, that this is kind of what you've been following. So why does it even need examining? It was created, looks good to me as it is now. I mean, maybe there's a procedure, I assume there is locally, for someone to look at, or the board itself to say, policy committee, we want you to take another look at this piece of our policy. But I don't know why it's driven by this discussion is driven by what the VSBA has suggested on the change to D32, making it D23. This seems to be a fit to this new D23, just like it was to the old D32. And as far as I know, at least not the limited time I've been on here, nobody said we need to get rid of this part of our policy that deals with controversial sensitive issues, which I think we need more than ever. So I'd like to keep it in. Again, if you need a motion, I'll make it.
Chris, something to say?
Yeah, so I just want to say, the board has directed the committee to align as much with the VSBA as possible. And times when we have come to the board for first readings with policies that have not aligned, there have been many questions about why are you not aligning with the VSBA and wanting us to do that. So I would instead like to make a motion that we approve D23 to go forward to the board for a first reading, with the second part of the motion being to put teaching about controversial sensitive issues on the March agenda to create a local policy.
But we already have a local policy.
We do not,
on the
actually.
issue, and it didn't align before with D32. I mean, this portion about sensitive issues wasn't in their D32.
Right, but we are
created,
moving
so.
toward aligning and having to do what statute requires. So that's what I'd like to propose as a motion to the committee.
My motion was first.
I didn't hear you make a motion. I heard you saying you would make a motion.
Okay, complete, I think.
Okay, hold on. Sonia?
Just logistically, I don't foresee that this would go before the board until the second meeting in March. So you have a little bit of time to pull together a second policy and potentially have it vetted before the second meeting in March. You have like an entire month. And you could propose both of those at the same time, because the first meeting in March is usually reorg, and I don't think will necessarily, I don't think that you would probably want to include policy with that meeting. It's usually a pretty long meeting. So just thinking about logistically, I think you have an entire month to sort of get your ducks in a row, and you could end up doing both for the next meeting that's available for the full board, and not have any lapse in coverage of having this policy in place.
For the life of me, I don't see the downside to keeping it.
Point of order. We have a motion. I don't know if we're getting a second on it or not. We should either know that we don't have a second or get the second and then commence discussion.
Okay, do we have a second to Chris's motion?
I will make that second with a friendly amendment to create a new policy D40.
Do we have any discussion?
I'm fine with Juliana's amendment. Thank you.
I don't know what creating the new policy. It's a motion to create and then propose a new policy. Is that what that means? Or use this language and just call it D40 and we move on because it's already been approved?
Yes, so so as we approve the changes to this policy, there'll be a new policy D40 created to cover what you want done. So there won't be any missed coverage. We'll have both policies. We'll have two different policies covering those two particular topics.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Since we already have D32 in place and that language is already in it, could we make a motion? I know I can't. Someone that we recode D32 as D40 and remove the initial implementation, and then it stays in place because it's already in place. So it's really just recoding it and removing a section that's going to be elsewhere. We don't have to create a new policy because it already exists and is in place. It's just modifying what we already have. I don't know if that procedurally, and Andrea might know if procedurally we're allowed to do that.
Well, have we voted on Chris's motion yet?
No, because we're still in discussion.
Discussion.
Yeah, I mean, my contribution to the discussion is, I don't know about the procedural piece, but my goal would be to see this school district keep that portion without having to debate it. It's not, if you will, it wasn't a topic of controversy, the controversial sensitive issues portion of this. So, I mean, if it could be relabeled D40 and still be part of the policy and you don't have to go rehash it, that's fine. Or just keep it part of D23. Either way. I guess I don't see the huge downside to having it retained where it is.
So is it duplicative by having it in both this D23 and in the D32? Do we have a statement of that twice then?
D32 goes away.
Well, D32 will be rescinded if we adopt D23.
Okay, so by rescinding D32 then, we would lose that which is at the bottom of page.
Only if it stays crossed out.
Right, that's what I'm saying. If the way it is there, we would lose that regardless of whether we create it as a D40.
Yes.
I'm not convinced it's needed to be removed to D30, D23. But that's my contribution.
I don't know. Camera over here. There we go. So I don't know if that will pick up. So my thought was changing that D32 to a D40. Yeah, it's not working very well. Changing the D32 to a D40, removing the first part and moving that up, and then we don't rescind D30. Well, I guess we recode D32, and then it doesn't go away because it stays on the books.
Because I think that's the important piece that everyone is concerned about. At least I know I am concerned about not having that go away. We want to keep it. So that's an important piece. Is it fit for being a standalone policy?
I think it aligns well with where it is, but if we want to stay in the spirit of the VSBA, we should move it to its own local policy code.
And the recommendations of VICLA as well.
With all due respect, I'm not sure why we have to be concerned about that. Why can't we have a local policy we add things to it that we think are important locally. That's what I'm advocating for.
That is what we're talking about, having a local policy. Right now it's combined with the VSBA policy. So we would have D23, the VSBA model policy, and then we would also have a D40, which is the local policy specifically about the sensitive issues.
I mean, maybe somebody could articulate the reason we're concerned about jiving. Are we going to have, I mean, when I was in the military, we had the IG come and inspect our policy manual, and, you know, we got maybe dinged on the inspection. Are we going to be inspected by the VSBA, and are they going to give us a black mark?
It's been the direction from the board to us to do that.
My tongue is in my cheek. I don't really think that's something to be concerned about, I could say.
Right, the VSBA is a advisory.
Right, I know.
Yeah.
We're just trying to stay consistent with direction of the board.
We have a motion on the floor. I think we got a little bit, so the motion, Andrea, is to replace our current D32 with D23 and create a new policy, potentially named D40, for just the sensitive issues.
I think it was,
Is that right?
well, it was actually that you're going to present D23 to the board as a first reading, and that you are going to create a new policy, D40, to cover the teaching of the sensitive issues, is my understanding.
So, my understanding, continuing the discussion, is that the board could, and this would be my concern, frankly, the board could say, we're going to approve D23, but we're not going to approve this new D40 because we want to play with that and change it. That's my concern. I say we recommend D23, but we uncross out the teaching about controversial sensitive issues.
I mean, in the same vein, the board could also say, we have directed you to stay with the model policies. This is not part of the model policy. We want you to remove it. So it's two sides of the same coin.
I don't know where it says, I'm not mistrusting anyone, but everyone seems to be saying, stick with the model policies. Well, if that's really the direction, then I really do not need to be here. If that's what we're talking about, we have to just do what they say. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Otherwise, why do we have this committee? To be blunt. So I don't accept that as the direction. I'd like to see that if there's minutes someplace that say we want to keep the policy the same as recommended by VSBA. If that's true, then I really wonder why we have anybody here.
I think it's maybe not voiced that strongly, Tom, but it's more in the spirit of it, to make this body work more efficiently, and but I don't know if it's exactly that. And it is beneficial to have these discussions, even if we do stick to the BSBA recommendations. It's just for anything to get ourselves up to speed about it. So, I mean, I would recommend we do stick to that as best we can. And I think that's what the effort is here.
And the VSBA, as I understand it, has always left the door open to add, not subtract, but add.
Yeah.
And also to create local policies. They have never issued any kind of a statement that says, do not create local policies, only use ours. Each district has its own identity to do that.
Well, at least at my age, 2019 is not ancient. It's not ancient history. So are you saying this directive or wish that we comply and sync with the VSBA is something of recent vintage? Because, let me just finish that statement. What happened before, apparently, was adding this language to a policy that was proposed by VSBA. All I'm saying is let's keep it. We added it before to this instructional materials. Let's keep it.
But we have
Why
new
create a-
information. We have new information
What's
from
the new
VICLA.
information? How does any of this contradict this controversial sensitive issues piece? How does it contradict anything in the language proposed by SBA?
Giuliano?
I call the question.
All right. Our motion is to, I've lost my train of thought because I think the train moved out of the station.
It's understandable.
Yes. Andrea, could you just repeat that for us
Yeah,
again?
the motion is to present the board with the first reading of policy D23 and to create a policy D40 to address the sensitive issues and then present that at a later time. It will have to be legally vetted just to make sure nothing has changed since what we put in it in 2019, because we know the sensitive or the selection of instructional materials statute has changed, and that's why VSBA initially deleted D32 because it was no longer aligned with statute.
Okay. All right. Having heard that motion, to move D23 to the full board for a first reading and offer the suggestion to create a D40 dealing with sensitive issues. All those in favor? We have,
Aye.
okay. Let me just do this because I'm working with two different places. My head is on a spin here. So we've got, it's Chris, Giuliano. Anyone else? Okay, Tim?
Aye.
Okay,
No.
Tom, all right, no, it's Tom, all right. We have a majority believing that we should turn this over to the full board for a first reading. So we will do that. We will move it to the full board with a suggestion to create a D40 local policy regarding the selection and teaching of sensitive issues.
So
And to-
Chris was a yes. I didn't hear her.
Yes, Chris Parker,
Okay.
Peccanelli, Tim Bolton.
Okay. Thank you. And you're not voting tonight, I take it. For on
And to
this.
Sonia's point, we have at least until the second meeting in March to do
And I
some
think
intel on this.
In all fairness, Tom, we will bring your points to the board as a point of discussion so that they understand as well and can maybe clarify a little bit more where they want us as a policy committee to go to do that.
I did my job. You guys did yours.
Thank you all.
It's the way to go, but discussion's over.
Yes, okay. So moving on to 5.4, rescind selection of instructional materials D32. It would appear that now goes back into its holding pattern.
Right.
So we'll hold that until after the board meeting where it gets discussed. Anyone have questions about that? Andrea?
Well, my question is, that's the one that VSBA deleted in May, and it's in their May report on their website because they said it was no longer aligned with statute. And they didn't feel they should, that board should keep policies that they know are not aligned with statute.
But where does that put us? If we rescind that, does that leave a blank spot in our, I'm asking the committee for that. Does
Well,
that leave a blank
what
spot?
we were told is that the policy that I was concerned about losing will be lost.
Right, that's what,
So, yeah, I don't like that result.
So In the policy notes, what it says for today is VSBA rescinded D32 due to not aligning with statute before providing D23. So that's an interesting thing. But I will say nothing changes until the board goes through 2 readings. So we don't create a hole because the things that are in place stay in place through 2 readings. So we will have the first meeting in March, which will be board reorg. And then these policies won't even come to the board until the second board meeting in March. And that will only be for first reading. So nothing changes until second readings. So we wouldn't lose anything. We would continue to work through in policy committee. We would put forth the sensitive issues section, which is the exact same wording as what we have now. So we're not losing anything there, and nothing changes until the board has 2 full readings. So we would retain everything we have in place at least until the end of March, and have the opportunity to put the sensitive materials into its own policy, which still retains everything we have in place today. So we're not actually losing anything. We're just reorganizing them a little bit, keeping aligned with VSBA, which again, the board has directed this committee to do.
I heard a little comment on that from Chris, that it wasn't direction, but anyway, the D32 that was vetted by VSBA, I don't think it's correct to say that they vetted the D32 that the BUUSD had that included sensitive issues. They may have vetted their own D32, the thing they call D32. I thought Luke said that they wouldn't have even looked at our sensitive issues piece. Isn't that what I was told? So that wasn't like it. They said this sensitive issues piece is something that should be deleted. They never weighed in on our sensitive issues piece. So I want to correct that to make sure that's clear. Thank you.
So if we know that we have no hole in our policies by the actions that we take today, and it sounds as if we're covered, I think that's very important to make sure of that. Because in a month, you never know what can happen. Okay. So we'll go forward from there. So, Andrea.
I'm sorry. I'm hearing a contradiction, because if we say we're always following VSBA, and in May, VSBA said this policy is not aligned with statute, it needs to be deleted, and their verbiage, it's out on their website, said delete it because it doesn't align with statute, and your policies need to align with statute, and they said they would revisit creating a new policy at a later date. So they deleted the D32, and then in November came up with D23, but VSBA was saying it's better to have no policy in place than one that doesn't align with statute. So that's just where I'm getting confused, because we say we're following VSBA, but I guess we're not if we're going to keep a policy that we know is not aligned with statute.
Are we suggesting by that statement that the sensitive issues, controversial topics piece is not aligned with statute? I mean, it's a local policy dealing with something that was, someone deemed necessary. But is that what's being said, that that's not aligned with statute?
No, the instructional materials portion.
Okay.
Selection of instructional materials as written is currently aligned with, there isn't aligned with current statute.
Right. So that's been taken care of by the motions being proposed with everything crossed out that everything crossed out. And then a D40 has been proposed. Yeah. So I don't see the concern.
All right. So do we need a motion, Andrea, from this board to rescind D32? To send that?
If you're following VSBA's guidance, which in May they had said to rescind it, then if you want to do that at this point, then you would make a motion to present this to the board to be rescinded. If you want to take the chance and leave it out there, you know, it's not aligned with statute. Is someone going to come after the district? I don't know. Probably not. But so it's either motion to present it for rescission or hang on to it. I guess it's a matter of the liability.
And am I correct that adopting the policy takes, 2 readings, but rescission can be done immediately? So in theory, this could be rescinded before the new policies are in place. Is that accurate?
Yes.
That's what's happened before.
Yes.
But it would still not even come up until the second board meeting in March.
At the earliest.
Right.
So we could send this through to the full board with the recommendation to be rescinded. The D32. And that would all take place in the same meeting.
Yep, I think that's true. And
Juliana?
by then, at that same meeting, we could also have the D40, which would be the local policy. And it's the number that determines what's a local policy versus what's a VSBA policy. So currently, we do not have a simply local policy on this issue because of the numbering.
So we would have, at a full board meeting, I'm just clarifying this to make sure that everybody who hears this knows, we would have basically 3 actions: approving D23, rescinding D32, and approving D40. Okay.
You'll have first readings of D23 and D40, and you would have a rescission of D32. And then at your next meeting, you would have the second and final reading and adoption of D23 and D40.
Okay. All right. Giuliano, anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to double check and make sure admin was comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for asking that, Juliana.
Are we all clear on that? So we move.
You need a motion.
So moved.
Okay. I need a second.
I'll second.
Chris, second. All those in favor of that, of the action of sending get these numbers right, D22 to the board for,
You already have a motion on that, Alice. This motion is just to rescind D32.
okay, so to rescind D32. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Tim?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Okay. All right. T, C, G. Yes. All right, motion carried, but we will bring that forward. So we'll bring that forward to the full board. Now we can move on to number 6. We'll revisit personnel recruitment, selection, appointment, and background check B20s. There were some questions about the optional statement here. The BUUSD will ensure that employees receive training in non-discrimination, bias, and anti-racism as part of the BUUSD onboarding process. That was the discussion on the floor.
I have something to say about that.
Yes.
I paid a visit to the school, and Luke was kind enough to meet with me. And we reviewed very briefly. It really wasn't enough time, but we did take a look. I got a chance to see at least some of the rough outline of some of the training, because I don't know if folks recall, last time we were here, Luke mentioned that there was some training. It's proprietary. It's something that the school pays for and probably licensed so that, only the people who are part of the school can engage in the training. We can't give access to it to everybody. So, but anyway, I am concerned that creating a policy, it is, I note it is optional. Adding it is optional, not required by whoever does the requiring. Talk about controversial topics, frankly. And I just don't know that, I don't think that needs to be added to this, to our local policy. I will make a motion right now to delete that from this proposed policy. There's
what are you
portion-
recommending you
There's
delete?
another portion that I'd like to address that's also mentioned, but I don't know if it's got to be part of my motion. But my motion right now is to delete. I'm looking for the policy now. This is B20.
B20.
Yeah. It's on the first page. It's underlined. What's crossed out is the word optional, and it says the BUUSD will ensure that employees receive training in non-discrimination, bias, and anti-racism as part of the BUUSD onboarding process, period. It's that sentence that I am moving to delete from this proposed B20.
Now, is it a delete or is it not include?
Not include, whatever, I don't know what the difference between those two things would be, but whatever verb you want to use.
Andrea?
Yeah, we don't usually use motions for all the different alterations we're making at the committee level. You guys just discuss them, agree to them, and then you usually make a motion to, present it to the board as amended. But if we start taking motions for every little change that we make in these policies, you're going to have a lot of motions going on for every policy.
Would you like to change it to a recommendation?
Yes, but
Okay.
I mean, I anticipate people are going to disagree. Maybe
Yeah.
somebody will. I don't know.
I
what,
would definitely disagree.
So, but well, yeah, I mean, that's part of the discussion, but we need to, yeah. But, yeah, I mean, I guess the motion in the previous one was about the whole thing. I guess,
Right.
but, okay.
So as we're looking as moving this B20 forward, there is that has come from an optional statement that has been put in there by the VSBA for school boards to use. So if there's discussion around that optional, we've
Now's the time.
now's the time.
Right.
We've heard
right,
from
right,
you.
right.
Is there any other discussion on that? Any
I mean,
other
I'll
questions?
flesh out why I don't
Okay.
think it's a good idea. I mean, I think there's some underlying assumptions that I didn't have a chance to really look at completely the training, but I saw enough. There's in this area of training, I just don't think we need to be indoctrinating new people with some of these underlying assumptions as if they need to accept them. I mean, I the notion that I mean, I'd like to review the training a little bit more thoroughly so that I don't speak out of turn necessarily, but the whole, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that the training would involve some acknowledgement and frankly acceptance of the transgender ideology piece that I don't think I can be part of a mandatory training of people coming on board. It's one thing to deal with individuals with gender dysphoria with compassion, involve their parents, and move on from there, but to impose a point of view that I think is implied by the training is I think not appropriate. I mean, I've got more to say, but that's the first thing that I want to say.
Chris, you have your hand up.
Yeah, first I want to say that I object to the word indoctrination heavily. And secondly, the wording in that optional sentence talks about non-discrimination, bias, and anti-racism. It says absolutely nothing about gender, transgender individuals, gender dysphoria, and to be putting that into this section of that line in the policy, I feel is completely inappropriate and frankly offensive. And that's what I'd like to say about that. The other thing is that the one of the reasons that this came again for this policy this month was to look at the additional legal feedback. And so I just want to make sure that people have looked at the policy notes that give the information of the additional legal counsel feedback that we got from our lawyer about that section that we had questions about the abuse registry. So that's something we also need to take into consideration. And I would not support taking out the sentence about the training for onboarding. Thank you.
That was legally vetted and recommended that we have that in there.
I don't see that as a necessarily a legal vetting and recommended that it be there. It's still a policy matter whether it be in there. And for it's unfortunate people would take offense. I'm just talking about the policy. And
the policy does not mention transgender individuals, so I don't know why that's being put in there.
Here's what led to that. I tried to explain that. I asked to look at, because last time we were here, I think I asked the question whether the training, whether we have training that would be proposed consistent with this. And I believe that Luke mentioned last time that he had this bank of training in his computer available to the teachers. It's something for them to look at on a voluntary basis or as a retraining if they make some kind of mistake. So I said, I contacted him. I think he may have even said last time, if anybody wants to take a look at it, might be a good idea to do that. So I took him up on that, sent him an email, I think, and called him and went to the school. We didn't have a tremendous amount of time. And I think we looked at it for maybe 15 minutes and looked at some of the topics, which included the transgender topic. So that's why I mentioned it. I thought he said, I don't speak for him, that could be a piece of it, of this training, onboard training, as well as the race piece and other things. But I mean, I don't know why anyone would take offense at me discussing this. If we can't discuss stuff, then yeah, I'd better go home because I'm going to talk and going to use the labels. So there you go.
Sonia?
I would argue that the conversation that Mr. Kelly is having is exactly why we need to have the training.
I do have
I'm
also.
not sure I understand what that means.
I also had a question about that. Does that actually fall under the heading of procedure rather than policy? Is that something that, because we've been rather consistent.
Yeah,
with saying
it's a
that we-
recommended line from
Yeah.
I believe the VSBA's equity consultant. We also did it is recommended from our legal counsel as well, but we have these trainings,
Right.
this specific training. So
I was just wondering, and that's what has bothered me, and I was looking it up, that because we've been trying to get procedures out of the policies,
Yeah.
have the procedures in the procedure. So is that a procedure that then follows rather than part of the policy? In order to make sure that everyone is aware and well-trained and has specific information, and we as a district are assured that these folks have this training. Because what I was thinking, where I came from was in the pre-service teaching now, these issues are addressed. And if someone comes in who has a degree, has a license, and they've been through this training at some other place, that's why I'm torn whether or not that is part of the policy or whether that's part of a procedure.
Legal counsel, by the way, did weigh in last time. That's where there may be references to this, just as a reminder. Referring to this line, it says it is optional, but it sounds like the district is already doing this. It does not say when it has to occur, so I think it is safe given your current practice. I would add that if you only do the training at the beginning, you may want to add some version of it for someone who joins mid-year. So I don't see legal saying you've got to have it. You just commented, he or she, that it was something already being done at some point. And that may or may not be true. I don't know. That's not what I gathered from my discussion with the principal, that it was there available. I don't know, whether any of it is required at any time, but maybe it's being done. I don't know what the policy is.
And I think my question would be, if we're going to ensure, and you look at someone's transcripts and they already have this, they don't need to take our training, right? They don't have to sit with our computer training because we have ensured that they had that.
yeah, I don't know how easy that would be to stay on top of for the HR folks. Certainly look into it. But
Yeah, that's where my question really is not what the language of the statement is, but whether or not it's policy or whether it's procedure.
Our current mandatory trainings,
Mhm.
just so folks know, these are annually mandatory by statute, and also as part of onboarding is bloodborne pathogen, bullying recognition response, child abuse mandatory reporting, FERPA confidentiality of records, and Title IX compliance. Those are the only things that are currently required, and that's in line with statute. And those are annual requirements.
yeah, not just for new people.
Right, for everybody.
The rest of the library is over 100 additional trainings that are if you want or if they're assigned because there's an issue. But
Right. So it may not be entirely accurate when legal counsel said, and he or she may not have known that it sounds like the district is already doing this. I'm reading from last month's policy notes. When he said this, I assume he meant these topics. Yeah.
So the question on the floor is, do we include this optional line? Do we leave it out? To B20.
Chris has a hand up.
I'm sorry, Chris.
That's okay. I'm in favor of leaving it in, but I was going to talk about the other legal counsel feedback. So if you want to get people's opinions on this part first, then I can say my other part next about the sex abuse registry that we talked about last month as well.
Right. Any further discussion on the optional line? Okay, Chris, the registry.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, so I thought it was interesting, his feedback about the line out of the statute of 16 VSA 255I, and he quoted that there. And then his piece about you can add others if you want those things to be an absolute bar to employment, but only the sex offense registration calls for that under the statute. And then I thought the point was well taken. My thought is that you can still decide not to hire someone if they appear on another abuse registry, but that wouldn't necessarily have to be a part of the policy. So I thought that was really helpful information and guidance for us on how to move forward.
I agree with that. I found it very helpful, and we would definitely follow that. So,
Well, if the Vermont Child Protection Registry, that's one of the two other registries that we talked about last time, right?
Yeah.
And also the Vulnerable Adult Abuse Registry. Those are the two other registries I think we talked about. I guess I don't see why we wouldn't, if Chris is saying he wouldn't hire somebody that was on one or both of those registries, why do we have to just comply with the statute by adding the sex offender registry? Why not put those also?
Other than those two, Tom, are there any others, or that would be a complete list if we just added those two?
Well, if we need to ask, I mean, I don't want to be providing legal advice to the board. That's not my role here.
Right. Yes.
I think those are the only other two, but I don't know if that may have been the question put to legal counsel by Chris, because I think it may have been off the record after the meeting, but I did mention to Chris those two after the meeting, wrote them down. I don't know what the legal counsel specifically said those are the only two or not.
will they address that
Yeah.
here
Did they?
at the bottom of this?
My thought is that you can still decide not to hire someone if they appear on another abuse registry.
Because we reached out that week.
Right. But why would it not be in the policy? Again, we're here to talk about whether it's the policy of the school not to hire somebody who appears on the child protection registry. And I'm saying for one person, citizen guy, saying that might be a good idea, not to hire somebody who's on the child protection registry, just like we don't want to hire somebody who's on the sex offender abuse registry, or a person that is on the registry labeled vulnerable adult abuse. I'm just saying it's equally well. You can debate whether it's equally, but it would be important maybe and helpful to also make that part of the policy.
I mean, I agree. And the piece about if it's an absolute bar to employment, why wouldn't we put it in there? And if that would make it a more comprehensive list, I mean, maybe that's a question of for our legal counsel. If we put those two in, is there any issue with that, with our decision to say like that is the decision? Or is there a case to be made for why that should not be listed there registry by registry to make it more comprehensive than what statute requires?
So who gets that question? Do we send this back to our counsel for that question?
We can Certainly.
Because from that, what would be any negative outfall from putting those?
I
Is
don't,
that-
I don't think Sean was saying we shouldn't put it in there. That's not how I read it.
Yeah. You can decide.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, goes back to the thought of, is it policy or is it practice?
I mean,
Or-
his take is that we can add others. But right now, the way it's currently written covers us enough, but we can add others, if that makes sense.
So is there any further discussion of additions or deletions to B20? Do we just put that line right out of the statute into the policy? Yeah. A person convicted of a sex offense that requires registration pursuant to 13 VSA Chapter 167, Chapter 3 shall not be eligible for employment in this district?
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm noticing that in the first paragraph under policy, we struck out and contractors. But in the second paragraph, contractors are still in. I'm just wondering if that's an inconsistency that we need to also remove contractors from the second paragraph.
Those
Or if it's a
contractors and
different-
employees of contractors who may have unsupervised contact with students. It doesn't define them in the first paragraph. It does define them in the second.
Well, it's more about the background checks. The second paragraph is a different context,
Okay.
in my view. So I think it's actually okay to keep it in there.
Yeah.
Are these the new strike throughs and underlines? Is that from VSBA or was that from our legal counsel? Do you
I think it's
remember?
for VSBA.
That was from VSBA.
Yeah, I'm just looking now, Luke, at the model policy, and it's like that in the model policy as well, that contractors is not in the first paragraph, but it is in the second.
Yeah, they're just different contexts. I think that's actually right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Because it goes on to enhance it by saying unsupervised contact. Okay, so, now after much discussion here, are we ready to send this through for a first reading at the board level? Any comments, concerns about that?
Does that require a motion?
It's trying to determine whether or not that's what we need to do. Do you have any questions about that? Anyone? Andrea?
I just wasn't sure if you have any amendments or if the motion is going to be to have it as is. I'm unclear. I'm just getting a little confused. That's all.
I think we all are a little confused here. All right, so as written, do we have a motion to send this through for a first reading or any other additions or corrections?
John's not here, but he had brought something up last time that I don't think we finished the discussion on. So at the risk of bringing up another topic at 7:30, under recruitment number 4, there's a line about the next to last line. In reviewing a criminal background check, the district will consider issues of historical inequity. That was a topic of discussion last time. And I thought we were going to see what legal counsel had to say about that. If that was something that needed to be in there, if we were going to strike it. John's not here, but I remember he brought that line up. I couldn't find it before, but
Okay. So, Chris,
Yeah, so do we want to maybe keep this at committee for March?
that was my next statement.
I'm thinking maybe if we can go back to legal to ask about adding, if the committee wants to do this, about adding those other two registries to be more comprehensive. If in fact that is the practice of the district, that we would not hire someone who came up on those registries. And then this question that Luke is bringing up, and then perhaps we could put that to bed in the March meeting and then be ready to move it to the board after that. So do we need a motion for that, or we just agree to do it?
I think that's just agreement.
Yeah, you can just agree to do that.
Okay,
Decide-
that's what I would recommend. We have a lot of questions still, so I would recommend that we keep this in committee and put it on the March agenda.
Okay, we will do that. Items for the future agenda, which would be B20. We'll return B20
D40.
and D40.
And when I look at the parking lot from tonight's for this agenda, the only two things, let me see, I'm scrolling up here. The only two things, A and B, that are in the parking lot now, as far as I know, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, we don't have any new information on either F33 or E1 to be ready to bring that up in March. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah. So I think at this point, we just probably have those two that we just mentioned for the March agenda. Unless anything comes up with VSBA that would, between now and then, that would necessitate putting that on, any changes or that sort of thing that Tina
I
tracks.
think it's unlikely we'll get a lot while the legislative session's in place.
And I'm hoping I can get an answer to the D32 question about why they recommend rescission. But everybody's out of the office. It's really hard to get an answer on everything. Andrea.
Back on 6.1, you talked about you're going to go back and seek legal advice. Are we documenting who's taking the lead on that? Is that Chris Hennessy? Is that you,
Yeah,
Alice?
Tina and I will take that on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay,
And I
great.
have a question about the future agenda that you mentioned,
Uh-huh.
Alice. So D40, the newly proposed D40, is that truly going to be on our agenda, meaning policy committees? Or is that just something we've asked the board to look at? I mean, I'm just confused by you mentioning that would be a part of number 8, items for future agenda, which I thought you meant the next meeting of this committee. You said
yeah.
D20 and D40.
Right. Well, D40 we could send that through to the full board for a first reading, but is there anything else that we need to look at prior to that as a policy committee?
And then, yeah, I was just asking the question. I don't know the answer to your question.
There's somebody, Andrea.
Yeah, if you're going to be creating a new D40 for the local policy, it should be drafted, legally vetted, and then brought to this committee. And then after you review the legally vetted draft, you can decide if you're ready to send it to the board for the first read.
Okay.
So as I understand it, I'm slow. We need to have it on the agenda,
Yep.
to craft it, and send it off to legal if there's something general. Is that fair? Is that what we're saying?
We can craft.
We craft it.
have
The
vetted.
committee doesn't craft it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So hopefully for next month, we'll have it.
Yeah, it shouldn't be hard to craft.
Go right. It's a cut and paste.
It's cut and paste. It is
That's what I
crafted.
thought. It's already been done.
Yeah. So we'll be clear on that. All right, anything else for future agendas? Next meeting then for us is March 20th. And
May I ask people out in virtual land, has the owl worked without problems this evening?
It has worked perfectly.
It has.
So far, so good.
Yep.
Yeah, it was very clear and easy to hear.
Hallelujah, we may have figured this out.
Thank
Thank you.
I had two things. One, so Chris, you guys will put a D40 together and have that go by legal before our March meeting.
By March 20th, yes.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. And then I also just wanted to say and let people know and have it be part of the record that both John and Tom have agreed to stay on the committee for another year, as per the board's okaying committee members, town and city committee members staying on for a second year. So thank you to both of them for agreeing to continue to work on this committee and slogging through it with us. I appreciate it, and I'm glad we have a second year to keep our work going forward. Thank you very much to both of them.
Thank you.
all right,
I have a question, Alice.
yes, sir.
5.1 is BUUSD policy index review. And that is something that we do, but it's listed under new business. And since we do it every meeting, should it be listed under old business? Since it's a standing agenda item, I just don't.
It's
No,
a
it's
review, so it could be new stuff.
Okay.
That's why I think it's there.
Yeah, and it could be also just a standalone, like the approval of the minutes. Follow
True.
that. It could just, it wouldn't have to be under any business. It's just a standalone piece of the
Routine.
of the routine of the meeting. Yes.
I always took it as just because there can be new stuff to update, but it's a good point.
Yeah, a routine action.
Yeah, and normally agenda protocol is the order that you have here. We don't have standalones. Things fall under new business or old business. That's just a standard protocol.
I don't care where it is. I was just curious.
Yes.
Since we
Okay.
do it every week
That's all right.
or every month.
Probably since we're used to having it there, probably the best thing to have it there. All right, motion to adjourn. Anyone?
So moved.
All right.
Second.
All right, we got more seconds all over the place. We have a motion, we have a second. Anyone opposed to adjourning? All right, we're good. We are adjourned.
Good night, everybody.
7:37.
Thank you, Alice.